Hi guys, ever wondered what life was really like on the frontier? Today, we'll take you through 15 brutal truths about the Wild West, from stinking towns and scurvy-inducing diets to dangerous wildlife makeshift medicine and unpredictable gunfights. You'll learn why extreme weather, forced labor, and isolation made everyday survival a challenge. If you think you could handle rattlesnakes in your boots or treacherous river crossings, think again. Hit subscribe and give this video a thumbs up, and let us know in the comments down below which Wild West danger would really trouble you the most. As we step into our first brutal reality, picture yourself riding into town after a dusty day on the trail. You swing down from your horse, ready to stretch your legs, and immediately your nostrils are assaulted by a gag-worthy cloud of filth. Welcome to Frontier Hygiene, where bathing was a luxury few could afford or bothered to seek out, and the air itself seemed to sweat with the collective stench of human body odor, animal manure, and uncollected garbage. Water was life-giving, but it was also scarce and precious. Most settlers hauled water from a nearby creek or well, lugging heavy buckets by hand. For many families, that meant 1 or 2 buckets a day for drinking, cooking, and the rare washcloth swipe across a grimy face. Full-body baths were all but unheard of. Even if you managed to heat a pot of creek water, privacy was limited. Cabins were cramped and shared by entire families, sometimes alongside livestock. Few had the time or means to fill a tub, so decades could pass between cleansing. Imagine weeks of sweat, dust, and smoke from cooking fires baked into your skin and hair, an everyday odoriferous cloak. Clothing suffered similarly. Most frontiersmen and women owned just a couple of changes of clothes. Sturdy wool or coarse linen dyed in faded earth tones, and those were rarely laundered more than once a season. Laundry meant heating water over a fire, scrubbing garments on a washboard, then hanging them outdoors to dry. Gram or Pa expelled animal fat and dirt, but she risked shrinking every garment without modern detergents or fabric softeners. Instead, most settlers simply wore caked and crusted shirts and petticoats until they either rotted or fell apart. Between perspiration, cooking grease, and the omnipresent dust, everyone walked into town wearing a patchwork of sweat stains and rot marks. The frontier town itself seemed designed to intensify the assault on your senses. Streets were little more than packed dirt riddled with potholes and drainage gullies. When it rained, those gullies filled with muck, human and animal, turning sidewalks into a slurry of feces, straw, and effluent from poorly maintained outhouses. Livestock wandered freely, leaving fresh droppings in their wake. Flies buzzed in thick clouds, landing on every exposed surface, bread loaves on market stalls, open barrels of salted meat, and the occasional unwashed face. Nobody bothered to sweep the streets more than once a week, if at all, so every step carried the risk of ankle-deep muck that squished between your boots. Private sanitation was no solution. Most homes used simple wooden outhouses positioned a safe distance from the dwelling, but safe was relative. In summer months, flies swarmed these privies, then drifted back into the cabins through open windows. February brought frozen outhouses unusable for days, leading desperate souls to relieve themselves in the snow beside the cabin, only to track wet footprints inside. Wells and cisterns were sometimes contaminated by seepage from shallow privies or decomposing animal carcasses, poisoning drinking water with typhoid and dysentery bacteria. Boiling water was practiced sporadically if anyone thought of the link between heat and disease, so sickness from contaminated water was as common as a Sunday sermon. Garbage disposal was equally primitive. Kitchen scraps, spoiled fruits, and broken tools were tossed into backyard pits or simply piled in the yard's corner. When the pile grew too high, someone might set it aflame, smoke billowing into the atmosphere, and adding another layer of odor to the already noxious air. Rats and mice thrived in these rubbish heaps, carrying fleas that leapt onto unsuspecting residents. Even if you swept the kitchen floor every day, the rats gnawing through walls and straw insulation meant you never truly escaped the constant threat of vermin. Pestilence followed closely on the heels of poor hygiene. Lice crawled through unwashed hair and seams of clothing, burrowing into your scalp and skin. Fleas from rats and cats bit through fabric, leaving itchy welts that often became infected from incessant scratching. In winter, body lice thrived in layered garments and bedding that went weeks without laundering. Smallpox, typhoid fever, cholera, and dysentery epidemics swept through settlements, killing entire families before neighboring towns fathomed what was happening. Illness was as much a fixture of frontier life as sunrise, yet many settlers barely noticed the stench after a while. Habituation to foul smells is a wonder of human perception. What newcomers found intolerable was background noise to seasoned pioneers. Mothers preparing supper in a smoky cookstove found it hard to believe that the pungent odors from the outhouse 10 yards away could bother them because they'd walked past far worse all day. Still, for visitors and newcomers, the first few days in town were a sensory trial by fire, triggering nausea and headaches until their bodies gradually desensitized. Children, too, grew accustomed. Little ones toddled barefoot in the dirt, then happily tucked into the same beds where a rat might have scurried moments before. Their skin ran raw from frequent chafing, and minor infections visible reminders of the frontier's harsh hygiene. Mothers feared tetanus from minor cuts, but lacked the antiseptics and antibiotics we take for granted today. They dabbed wounds with whiskey and wrapped them in reused strips of cloth, an all-too-familiar scenario in every household. Despite the grim conditions, a communal spirit emerged around these hardships. Neighbors traded soap-making tips, rendering animal fat with lye from wood ashes to eke out the occasional bath or laundry day. Barter networks formed where someone with a rain barrel offered bathing water to close friends in exchange for eggs or freshly baked bread. Church gatherings sometimes doubled as communal wash days, where women and children shared a warm trough of water on the church porch before Sunday services. In rare moments of respite, the steam of a makeshift bathhouse tent rose above town, offering a few lucky souls a proper wash if they could afford the 2-shilling fee. By the time you finally decided to move on, your lungs, hair, and boots had all absorbed frontier filth at a molecular level. That stench lingered long after you'd left, a testament to the sheer magnitude of frontier uncleanliness. Even in booming boomtowns where the West's fortunes glittered like gold in the riverbeds, the streets never quite lost their fetid edge. Removing the smell meant leaving civilization behind and staring down the next brutal truth of frontier survival. In the end, horrific hygiene was more than just unpleasant. It was a constant assault on health, morale, and dignity. It set the stage for disease outbreaks that could decimate a settlement and hardened pioneers into resilient survivors, or drove them to seek cleaner pastures elsewhere. This was the first brutal truth of the Wild West. Surviving the frontier meant confronting the unbearable stench of pioneer life every single day. And if that alone wasn't enough to break your spirit, the other 14 truths waiting just beyond the horizon would surely do the job. Under the orange glow of dawn, you're jolted awake by the crow of a distant rooster and the memory of yesterday's grime. You've just survived frontier hygiene, the stench of unwashed bodies, animal waste, and rotting refuse baked into every cabin wall. And now, there is no time to linger over that bitter realization. A new brutal truth awaits forced labor that stretches from sunrise to moonrise, demanding every ounce of strength you possess. Before the first cup of bitter coffee, you shoulder a pail and trudge to the creek. In the chill dawn air, your breath fogs and your fingers go numb as you lower the bucket into icy water. Each bucket is a gamble, fail to balance, and half the precious liquid splashes back into the mud. Yet without it, there's no coffee, no gruel, no hope of washing the caked dust from your face. Back at the cabin, you juggle water for cooking, washing dishes, and a fleeting swipe at your hair. Full baths are a fantasy. Hauling more than a few buckets would mean collapsing before breakfast. Next is wood gathering. The once verdant forest feels like solid rock under your axe. You swing in rhythm, each blow sending shards of bark and splinters flying. Sweat beads at your hairline, drips into your eyes, stinging like salt. Splinters embed in your palms until you barely notice the pain. By midday, you've stacked enough logs to fuel the cookstove and heat tomorrow's water, but your arms tremble under the weight of exhaustion. With the sun climbing higher, you trudge to the stable. 50-pound sacks of grain sit by the barn door. Horses stamp and snort their gleaming coats, a stark contrast to your dust-caked clothing. You heave a sack onto your shoulder every step, wobbling under its bulk. One misstep could snap an ankle, a risk you cannot afford. You fill all the troughs while flies buzz in your face, drawn to the sweat, and stray bits of grain in your beard. A quick bite of cold cornbread and salt pork hardly slows you. The field awaits. You hitch the plow to a mare whose ribs press against your knees. Together you carve furrows into hard-packed earth. Each stride is agony lungs burning back, bent over the handle's hands blistering on rough wood. You pause only when your vision blurs and the sun hangs directly overhead like a furnace. Rest feels like defeat, so you push on until the earth yields its first break. Afternoon brings fence repair. Barbed wire snarls around a splintered post. With a sledgehammer, you strike nails into weathered wood sparks of metal and anger flying. Gloves do little to protect bleeding knuckles. You curse the frontier's indifference as wire snaps back, slicing through cloth and skin. Nearby, a barn roof leaks, and you crawl into the rafters, each beam threatening to give way under your weight. The wind rustles the loose boards. One misstep would send you crashing into the hay below. As dusk falls, you trudge home, muscles screaming in unity. Dinner is a muted affair. A bowl of bean stew, stale bread, and the occasional piece of salted pork. Conversation centers on tomorrow's endless list of chores, planting seeds, mending tools, hauling manure. There is no laughter here, only the shared understanding that each sunrise will demand more than the last. Night offers scant relief. You huddle by the dying embers of the stove, warding off the creeping cold that seeps through chinks in the cabin walls. Memories of cozy hearths and waiting meals at home feel like illusions. Sleep eventually comes, dragging you under after a day spent more as tethered animal than man. Even dreams are laced with the thud of axe on wood and the groan of your own aching back. Still within this ceaseless toil lies a grim pride. You measure worth not by gold or comfort, but by endurance. Each blister and ache is a badge of honor, proof you've earned your place on this unforgiving land. At the occasional gathering, a barn raising, or church service, you trade stories of the hardest day you've survived. In sweat-stained faces and calloused hands, you find solidarity. Shared hardship forges bonds stronger than any distant promise of paradise. Yet you know the cost. Many neighbors will not last the season. Chronic ailments, rheumatism, gnawing at joints, hernias from overexertion, lung disease from dust. Claim bodies slowly. There are no doctors here, and death often comes unannounced. Few live to see 50. Most collapse under the frontier's merciless demands long before. And still, you rise before dawn, shoulder another pail, swing another axe guide, another plow. You do it for the promise of land, the hope of carving out a future with your own hands. You endure the broken sleep, the biting insects, the gnawing hunger, because somewhere beyond the endless toil lies the dream of prosperity. You cling to that dream as you cling to life itself. This is the second brutal truth of the frontier. Forced labor is unrelenting and unforgiving. Only those willing to break themselves daily will ever taste a moment's respite, let alone triumph over the wilderness. Yesterday's brutal schedule left your back knotted, but aching muscles are low priority once the wind bullies through the chinks and robs you of breath. The endless labors of Point 2 taught that sweat is the frontier's common currency. Point 3 demonstrates that the weather exacts payment in flesh and spirit. What your hands built under blistering effort can be shattered by a single night sky, turning triumph into wreckage before you wake. Winter sneaks in without ceremony. One afternoon, you mend a gate beneath mild gray clouds. By dawn, the gate is buried, posts swallowed under thigh-deep snow. Frost creeps along the inside of the window like silver moss, proof the cold. Answers no door you close. Boots stiffen into ice sculptures, and breath crackles into shards that settle on blankets. Every chore now requires twice the strength and twice the time, draining reserves you do not own. A hesitant midday sun melts surface snow long enough to create slick ruts, then retreats. At dusk, everything freezes again, imprisoning wagon wheels and splitting axe handles trapped in ice. Roads erode into jagged troughs, and each morning begins with hammer blows that free spokes and fingers alike. The freeze-thaw pendulum chews through woodpile patience and precious daylight faster than you can replenish any of them. Spring arrives laughing. Warm rains flirt for an hour, then turn every hollow into a brown torrent that surges across your freshly seeded rows. Water seeps through floorboards and rises knee-high in the barn, floating straw like soiled confetti. When the flood finally retreats, it leaves silt as slick as grease-drowned seedlings and mosquitoes eager for blood. Malaria spreads across cabins faster than gossip, felling workers, while fields lie ruined. Summer explodes with a bellows blast. By noon, the soil itself seems to breathe heat. Stand barefoot and your soles blister. Yet labor cannot stop, so you swing scythes and heft bales until sweat abandons the effort to run. Salt crystals cake eyelids, lips split in the dryness, and drinking warm well water feels like swallowing soup. Night brings no relief, only thicker air alive with mosquitoes that trade their bites for your restless sleep. The price of heat is the violence of storms. Thunderheads tower like moving citadels. For a moment, the prairie holds its breath, then wind lashes dust against exposed skin until it feels flayed. Hailstones crash next, denting pans and skulls alike, shredding gardens into green pulp. Lightning gallops along barbed wire and sets tinder dry grass alight. When rain finally arrives, it falls in sheets so dense you cannot see the barn door 10 steps away. Then the funnel appears. The sky bruises an unholy green, and a locomotive roar swallows every other sound. You dive into the root cellar palms on the quivering door. When the world finally quiets, you return to daylight and find the roof scattered across neighboring acres. Quilt pieces hanging from splintered fence rails, and the grain you counted on for winter, feed blown clean across the horizon. Decades later, pioneer journals swear the wind itself spoke in mournful tongues, still warning those wise enough to listen and mocking anyone arrogant enough to answer with bravado. Autumn looks merciful. By comparison, all copper leaves and crisp air. Do not be fooled. One clear night can draw a silent blade. Dawn reveals every vegetable glazed in ice. Corn collapses, potatoes rot where they grew, and pumpkins burst like forgotten kettles. You scramble to salvage what little remains, fingers cramping in cold mud, while calculating how many mouths the pantry can feed through oncoming months. Exposure never rests. Sunburn acquired during harvest peels, then cracks and bleeds once the first cold wind arrives. Frostbitten earlobes go numb, blacken, and must be sliced away with a pocket knife held over a candle. Eyes blinded by glare cannot track reading lines at night. Though records still beg to be kept by flickering tallow, clothing is treacherous armor. Wool that saves you in January suffocates you in July. Canvas trousers stiffen with sweat salt, rubbing inner thighs raw until each step is agony. Boots soaked during floods never dry, growing mold that rots stitching. Yet you lace them anyway, because bare feet on prairie grass guarantee punctures and infection. Not even walls obey. Logs shrink in drought, swell in rain, loosening dried clay so thoroughly that stars peer through night cracks. Tin patches rattle like kettle drums under gale force, letting rain pour onto sleeping children. Every season forces you onto the roof hammer in numb hand racing a sky intent on ripping everything loose again. Still, the sky's tyranny forges fellowship. When a neighbor's chimney snaps, others arrive with bricks. When frost kills half a crop, families barter what survived. Around smoky hearths, storm stories become shared scripture warnings brand new arrivals ignore at their peril. Yet camaraderie cannot promise survival. The prairie buries optimists and cynics alike beneath drifts or drought cracks. Tomorrow's dawn may unveil blue calm, or a wall of cloud ready to erase your latest repairs. So you wake stretching shoulders beneath a ceiling that may not last and scan the horizon before drawing a breath. You read the sky as a scholar reads scripture, translating every smear of cloud into commands. Hurry, reinforce harvest. Forced labor may bruise flesh, but weather judges the outcome, deciding whether sweat will bloom or vanish. Each sunrise, you gamble everything on the sky's temper, wagering crops, cabins, and lives. Ingenuity becomes as vital as endurance. You deepen cellars, steepen roofs, lash rafters with rawhide plant windbreaks of cottonwoods. You store grain in earthen pits lined with straw and clay, safe from flame and hail. And always behind each precaution, you whisper the same credo: survive today, improve tomorrow. Survival buys one more dawn, just enough time to confront the next merciless truth gathering beyond the ridge. The sky finally clears after yesterday's hailstorm, but every muscle still aches from rescuing livestock and nailing roof patches. Point 3 proved the weather rules your fate. Point 4 shows that the garments meant to guard you can become tormentors. Out here, cloth is rarer than whiskey bleach is myth, and a single tear can invite frostbite before breakfast or sunburn by lunch. What you wear isn't fashion. It's the last brittle membrane between skin and a ruthless climate. Every thread tells a story of scarcity, compromise, and quiet endurance. Most settlers own exactly 2 sets of outer clothes, the one on their bodies, and a patched reserve waiting on a peg. The shirt may have begun as feedsack canvas, the trousers as sailcloth salvaged from an abandoned barge. New fabric costs weeks of wages and lies 100 muddy miles away. Thus, the same wool coat greets sleet dust storms, funerals, weddings, and the Sabbath prayer. When sleeves fray, you cannibalize pillowcases. When buttons vanish, you whittle replacements from beef bones. Freighters occasionally display calico bolts, but by the time word travels, every yard is gone. Laundry is a battle you rarely win. First, you haul barrels of creek water uphill, then burn half a day's firewood to raise a boil. Caustic lye soap, rendered from hog fat and ash, eats color and skin alike, and each scrub shortens a garment's life so you gamble disease against disintegration. Steam fogs the yard, while shirts stiffen on the line. If a dust devil strikes grit, embeds forever. Hands throb for days, and the gray rinse water kills the grass in rings testimony to the cost of a token clean. Winter turns cloth into chains. Snowmelt soaks wool during chores. An instant freeze stiffens your coat until elbows crack. Fingers fumble with ice-glazed buttons, splitting knuckles that bleed onto white drifts. A damp hem drags across slush, forming frost daggers that chime with every step. When you stagger inside, frozen trousers stand upright beside the door, eerie scarecrows that will not thaw till morning. You rub cracked shins with bear grease and bargain another night's sleep from the cold. When the calendar flips, the same wardrobe becomes a furnace. Canvas shirts darken with sweat before breakfast, then blanch white with salt by noon. Heavy seams rub raw sores along armpits and thighs. Every swing of the scythe feels like skinning yourself alive. You dream of linen, but cotton is rarer than rain, so you labor half naked and risk sun poisoning, or cook inside the coat and risk heat stroke. Some neighbors slice sleeves off, entirely trading protection for ventilation, but the ragged edges whip skin raw during wind gusts. Salt lines etch peculiar maps across your chest. You study them like cartographers tracing routes to cooler days that never arrive. At night, you wring shirts over a bucket, collecting pints of sweat. You throw onto the tinder for morning cooking fires. Nights belong to the needle. A stub of tallow candle gutters, while you splice denim to wool leather, to linen anything to anything. Thread comes from unraveling the hem of a blanket. Thimbles are flattened musket balls. Stitches resemble topographic maps, wandering wherever the cloth allows. Ill-fitting seams pinch flesh, yet every crooked line buys one more sunrise of modesty and marginal protection. Shoulders hunch, eyes sting, yet you refuse to quit because each repair is cheaper than a coffin. When mother-of-pearl buttons vanish in straw, you lash clothes shut with horsehair cord, turning every dressing into a small punishment accepted without complaint. Boots deserve their own ledger of grief. Fresh cowhide arrives stiff as bark. Weeks of slogging turn soles to pulp. You tack scraps of horse harness across holes, smear them with tallow, and pray the patch holds through the next river crossing. Lose a boot, and you don't just hobble, you court tetanus from every rust nail on the trail. Children sometimes inherit only one boot and walk lopsided until growth snaps the leather entirely. The unlucky step on rattlesnake fangs or rusty barbs, and by the time fever takes hold, the doctor's buggy is 3 counties distant. Cloth also hosts an army. Lice knit nests at collar seams. Fleas hatch where waistband meets skin, and bedbugs stow away in quilt batting. Boiling kills some, but eggs survive, and within days the chorus of bites begins anew. Scratching opens welts that fester in summer heat and freeze in winter, breeding infections that a frontier doctor can't name, let alone cure. You sprinkle bedding with pennyroyal and hope the smell deters insects, but the scent also chokes sleepers, and babies wake coughing. Burning the garments would purge the pests, yet the prairie offers no fabric to replace what flames consume, so the cycle continues. Ragged dress gnaws at the spirit. Traveling merchants flaunt bright calico like impossible candy. You pretend not to stare as they tip polished hats. Weddings blend into funerals because everyone wears the same stitched-over coat. For children, patched knees become badges of adventure. For adults, they whisper quiet failure. Yet pride survives, cinched beneath a fraying belt and smoothed with calloused palms. You mutter jokes about frontier fashion, but the laughter sounds like creaking planks in an empty barn hollow and doomed to echo. Still, you thank those battered garments each dusk because nakedness would kill quicker than shame. Tomorrow, you'll face a different scarcity, the thin, repetitive meals that must fuel another cycle of mending and sweat. Cloth may scrape skin and cradle vermin, but at least it fills the gap between flesh and storm. Stomach emptiness is less forgiving, and that hunger waits at daybreak. Tomorrow's ration of beans and black coffee must power axe swings, fence posts, and another washboard battle. Even the strongest cloth cannot hide hollow cheeks for long, and hunger frays spirit faster than sand or sleet. Yesterday's threadbare coat still clings to your shoulders, but the emptiness beneath it growls louder than any seam rubbing skin raw. Point 4 exposed how scarce cloth abrades the body. Point 5 shows how a poorer diet crushes the spirit. Out here, meals are as repetitive as the windmills squeak, and each one reminds you that the frontier measures worth in calories you cannot spare. Breakfast is a gesture, not a feast. Hardtack flour water and chance lies on a tin plate, cracked by the butt of a knife until pieces resemble splinters. You soak them in black coffee, stretched with roasted chicory, and sprinkle ground eggshell to settle the mud. The brew scalds your tongue, but the heat tricks an empty belly into silence long enough to saddle a horse. Soon, the hollowness returns. You pry open yesterday's beans, now glazed with cold lard, and stir in shavings of salt pork, shaved clean of mold. The taste is smoke and brine and resignation. Each spoonful increases thirst, yet the well tastes faintly of iron and privy runoff. Boiling costs firewood you already burned, patching the roof so you gamble and drink. Later, when cramps twist your gut, you rationalize that the ache proves you're still alive. Dinner, if the word applies, is cornbread baked in a spider pan beside fence post coals. Stone-ground meal hides grit that chips teeth. You swallow anyway because grit fills space. The center stays damp, but the charred rim scratches down like sandpaper. You drizzle bacon grease to soften edges and call it luxury. Fresh produce is a memory. The early frost from Point 3 blackened tomato vines and burst squash. In the root cellar potatoes sprout white fingers toward a ceiling they will never reach. You break sprouts off, carve black eyes away, and find paler flesh beneath fewer calories, more hope. Cabbages collapsed beneath mold months ago. Carrots shrank into strings, hardly worth peeling. Malnutrition creeps in quietly. Your gums bleed when you chew willow twigs for toothbrushes. Bruises blossom at the lightest bump. You simmer pine needles for bitter tea, rich in phantom vitamins, and chase it with curses. Occasionally, a peddler rattles by, carrying a crate of shriveled apples priced like jewelry. You trade the brass button from your Sunday coat for 2 slice one into 6 translucent wedges and suck the other until only seeds remain. When beans run low, you hunt. Bison herds are rumors downwind of railroad smoke, so you set snares for jackrabbits. Steel traps cost money and time. Snares cost string and hope. Some nights you haul back 3 lean bodies, skin them, and boil meat until fibers surrender. Other nights, a coyote beats you to the loop, leaving frayed rope and deeper hunger. Salt stretches meat, but salt is mined 70 miles away. You scrape kettle crust, dissolve it in water, boil the slurry and skim off crystals with a spoon, too precious to lose. Hunger teaches chemistry better than any school. Supper time brings rot gut whiskey, the frontier's lullaby. It burns hot as a prairie fire, numbing joints worked past warning, but each swallow stacks thirst upon thirst. Your wife dilutes hers with water. You pour straight and pretend the sting equals satisfaction. Children suffer hardest. Bellies swell from bean bloat, while limbs thin like fence wire. You crack the final biscuit into equal shards and watch their eyes track every crumb. At night, they whimper from cramps. You spin yarns of orchards where peaches drip sun-warm juice, and they sleep chasing sweetness that exists only in memory. Sunday gatherings expose collective scarcity. Families arrive with shared casseroles, a single pot of beans, rare venison if a bullet found its mark. Chokecherry jam, bright as warning flags. You exchange recipes for stretching nothing. Baking soda to soften beans. Vinegar to cut grease coffee grounds, rebrewed thrice. The chatter is lively. The eyes betray calculation. Who still has flour whose chickens stopped laying? Who might barter nails for dried corn? Even in monotony, pride survives. You learn to spice beans with dusty chili pods, to steep dandelion leaves for earthy broth, to press wild sage between fingers until aroma floods the cabin with imagined abundance. A dash of flavor turns defeat into defiance. Yet the ledger remains unbalanced. Forced labor burns more calories than beans provide. Extreme weather washes gardens away or scorches them barren. Clothing rubs sores that refuse to heal on protein-poor flesh. A vicious loop tightens weaker bodies, yield smaller harvests. Smaller harvests weaken bodies further. Some neighbors break. A rancher swapped his only horse for a sack of flour, then died walking home in a blizzard. A widow abandoned her claim at dusk, carving into the doorframe east where cabbage grows. You envy her courage or her surrender, you cannot decide which. Still, you stay. Hope like yeast you cannot afford leaven's resolve. You save seeds from the least rotten squashmend fishing line with horsehair and hang strips of prairie turnip to dry beside the chimney. Every act whispers promise next season might be kinder. Tonight, you bank the cook fire, tuck children under patched quilts from point 4, and lie awake listening to the guttering stove and the slow chorus of stomachs. Outside, coyotes yip under a shivering moon. Inside, hunger paces like a restless rider in narrow halls. You roll over press palm to rib to measure the hollow and vow to face dawn because quitting would taste worse than any meal you've endured so far. Tomorrow another brutal truth waits just beyond the creek, ready to test whether hunger has left enough strength to meet it. Through it all, the prairie keeps its own counsel indifferent to empty plates or prayers. The wind rattles the stovepipe like a mocking spoon against an iron pot, reminding you that nature neither pities nor condemns. It only waits. And so you rise jaw set, determined that tomorrow's ledger will record survival, even if abundance remains a distant rumor. Because hunger may be cruel, but surrender would be crueler still. Last night's supper of weak rabbit broth had barely settled before dawn creaked open the cabin door, reminding your hollow gut how little the prairie offers. Point 5 proved hunger is a constant companion. Point 6 shows the prairie fights for every calorie you claim, arming itself with fangs. Stingers and claws. Each morning begins with the boot ritual. You knock heel against heel, then tip the leather, and wait. A prairie rattler hunting mice that nested in your footwear to gnaw the remaining lard may slide out in umber coils. One bite steals breath faster than starvation. So you shake listen, and only then slide in your foot, thanking the habit carved by other people's screams. Out in the chicken yard, a coyote paces ribs showing like barrel staves. One cartridge could end its threat. That same cartridge might be needed tomorrow for deer. Hunger writes brutal math. You wave shout-throw stones and gamble your hen's eggs against your ammunition ledger. Sometimes the coyote yields. Sometimes it returns at dusk carrying off a layer and the hope of breakfast. The fields hold menace as well as promise. Grasshoppers descend in green tempests, stripping beans bare, yet you net them for protein. Inside the writhing sack, a glossy black widow could lurk, drawn by free prey. One careless handful trades starvation for nerve-searing venom and a slow death on the cabin floor. When beans run out, you spearfish at dusk. Moonlight silvers the creek, but beneath lily pads, water moccasins float like drowned ropes. Wading in muddied shallows, you feel scales brush shin, and no supper could become amputation. Still, you jab-pull a bluegill free, and back toward shore with heart pounding louder than frogs. Smells of cleaning rabbit skins drift toward the tree line, inviting a bobcat. Its eyes glow ember red just beyond lantern reach. You raise a pitchfork muscles, shaking from days of half meals. One wrong lunge means shredded flesh and infection, yet retreat surrenders meat meant for winter. You hurl a rock. The cat melts away, leaving your pulse hammering in your ears. Not all thieves are large. Rats chew holes in grain sacks, losing more kernels than they steal. Cats help until coyotes help themselves to cats. You set traps fashioned from bent nails and scraps, but spring's rustbait spoils, and still the squeaking continues. Every missing cup of corn steals energy you needed to reset the traps. Hunger pushes you into predators' dens. Snakes warming on red rocks become meat and belt material. You pin one with a forked stick, crush its head, and feel triumph rise until a hidden fang nicks your thumb. Poison needs only a breath's width. You slice the skin, suck, spit, bind, and pray. Beyond the creek roam cattle that fled last season's stampede. Feral now, they charge anything on two legs, but a single steer equals months of dinners. You and neighbors lash timbers into a panel corral and smear molasses as lure. The bull crashes in tossing planks like kindling. A rope catches its horn. You are dragged through cactus until blood stripes your arms. At last, the beast collapses, and victory tastes like copper and dust. Sometimes, danger rides on fleas the size of grains. Prairie dogs harbor plague. Their pups tender as chicken tempt starving parents. One bite can seed black swellings, yet many roll the dice. Graves across the valley bear testimony, shallow mounds marked only by chewed sticks once used as soup spoons. Even grain work can maim. A scythe swing reveals a paper wasp nest hidden in ripe rye. The swarm boils out stings, punching through threadbare sleeves. Throat tightens. Vision narrows. You grit teeth finish the row, then stumble to creek mud for cool relief because storms threaten and grain must dry or rot. Despite the danger, settlers learn uneasy partnership with the wild. Owls thin gopher hordes that would eat seedlings. Snakes devour rats, planning the same theft. Women sew tiny bells on skirts so scorpions scuttle away from footfalls. Around the fire stories grow of wolves shielding lost children from cougars, or of a hawk dropping a rabbit beside a famished widow. Respect replaces malice. For the prairie's balance punishes arrogance swiftly. When dusk purples the horizon, you carry a lantern to the lean-to privy. Under the seat, a bark scorpion waits in the cool hollow wood tail, arched like a drawn quill. The sting is rarely fatal, but nights of vomit, sweat, and nerve spasms can drain a season's stored energy. Some settlers press raw tobacco to the puncture. Others whisper hymns while teeth chatter. Work pauses for no fever, so you drag yourself to chores. Vision swimming while scythe and shovel blur. Children learn early to step wide of rock crevices and to prod straw beds with sticks before lying down. Even so, small coffins sometimes follow tiny paw prints back to holes in the ground where curiosity met fangs. Grief is another predator chewing resolve, but fields still need weeding. And supper still depends on nimble fingers now absent. Dogs. One's companions may turn rabid after night fights with skunks. One foaming bark sends families scrambling for shovels and tears. Without vaccines, the only cure is a swift bullet, followed by weeks of watching children for telltale tremors. The silence afterward weighs heavier than the animal ever did. Still, tomorrow's danger will demand fresh nerve. After surviving Fang's stingers and claws, you limp into town, believing planked streets will spare you further danger. Point 6 proved predators hunt beyond the fence line. Point 7 exposes their microscopic cousins thriving inside the settlement itself. One breath on Main Street tells the story the air reeks worse than a coyote den, and every mud-filled rut teems with disease. The street is earth churned by iron tires and hooves. Manure piles rise like cairns shoveled aside only when threatened by flooding. Summer sun stews the mix into sticky tar. Each step pulls at boot soles and sends flies swirling. Boardwalks promise clean passage, but hide cesspools beneath loose planks. Rainwater horse urine and butcher's blood pool in dark hollows, mosquitoes rising in lazy spirals. Children splash for fun. Cholera laughs unseen. A wagon rolls past its wheel, flinging green sludge across your threadbare trousers, forever fusing stench to cloth you already cannot wash. Privies stand behind every business holes dug shallow because the water table sits an arm's depth below. A single storm lifts the contents upward, sending a rancid tide under back doors. Rats surf that tide on scrap wood, leap to flour sacks, and gnaw trails through grain you planned for winter. One bite seeds, typhus. Inside the general store, dry goods lie open to soot and beetles. You plunge a hand into sugar and scatter larvae that writhe like spilled rice. The proprietor shrugs extra protein he claims. You pay anyway. Another wagon of supplies will not arrive for weeks, and hunger already hollowed the family pantry. Water meant for relief carries its own doom. The town well sits downslope from the livery. Horse waste seeps through cracked stone into the bucket. Boiling helps, but firewood went to roof repairs after last hailstorm. Many dare the raw draft, trading thirst for later agony. Dysentery queues outside, warped outhouse doors, bending pioneers double before they reach a seat. Soap appears monthly when someone renders hog fat with caustic lye. Bathhouse tubs cost a nickel, yet water is reused until brown. Step in second and inherit a miner's grime. Step in third and inherit ringworm, curling across your ribs by week's end. Still, you pay because lice already march at collar seams. The doctor's shingle reads, bones set, teeth pulled leeches. 4 bits. His instruments are a saw, rusty forceps, and whiskey. Between patients, he wipes blades on his vest. Survival hinges on whether he hiccups before cutting. Mortality boards behind the church post new names each Sunday. Graves multiply in straight pragmatic rows on the ridge. Night cloaks nothing. Saloon floors soak up spilled beer spit and blood until boards squish. Lanterns lure moths that die drop and rot atop sticky countertops. Outside, the butcher dumps pig entrails into the gutter. Dogs drag ribbons of offal across the street, leaving crimson trails that ferment by dawn. Progress worsens decay. A new slaughterhouse promises wages, yet its offal pipe drains straight into the creek, where laundresses scrub clothes. Blood dyes the water pink every sunrise. Families still draw buckets. Soap cannot lift that smell. Typhoid travels faster than any stagecoach carried in droplets from a single cough near the school stove. Churchgoers kneel on pine floors, gummy with pitch dripped from smoke torches. The communion cup is wiped with one rag week after week. The preacher warns that cleanliness equals godliness, but the collection box never fills enough to buy lime for the pits. Faith may soothe souls, yet bacteria crave only bodies. Peddlers exploit panic-hawking cure-alls brewed from turpentine molasses and pure alcohol. Mothers trade eggs for tiny bottles pouring fiery syrup down children's throats. Fevers climb regardless, but hope tastes sweet, going in bitter, coming out. You adapt or perish. Twice a month, neighbors form a bucket brigade, shoveling manure into pits, sprinkling ash, laying fresh boards. Willow fly swatters become children's toys. On evenings when the prairie wind blows clean, the town almost smells like possibility. Then thunderheads roll in drains, overflow, and the cycle restarts. Rotten mud rises to ankles. Flies spawn overnight. Just as rattlers coil in boots, microbes coil in puddles unseen but patient. Point 7 teaches that the frontier's deadliest predator is smaller than hope and more persistent than hunger contagion. Bred by neglect and necessity, sharing the same cramped room. Funeral processions tramp through sludge boots, splashing the very mire that hastened the deceased's end. Pine boxes rest on sawhorses, while mourners swat flies from the face of sorrow itself. No one lingers. Earth shovels easily when soaked, and open graves fill with runoff if service drags on. Back in town, the undertaker boils his lone embalming needle, preparing for the next arrival. Some settlers flee eastward, selling claims for pennies. Yet most stay chained by debt or devotion. They daydream of future sewer lines, paved streets, and glass lamp globes that seal out insects. The land office posts sketches of grand boulevards, but the paper yellows and manure piles higher. Children memorize those drawings, promising to rebuild once they are grown, even as they cough through each restless night. Meanwhile, commerce uses stench as camouflage. Gamblers toss cards atop grubby felt, claiming the smell keeps outsiders honest. A blacksmith quenches horseshoes in a tub, already gray with ash, and drin steam rises, mixing metal tang into the communal miasma. Newcomers stagger retch, then laugh nervously when veterans slap backs and declare, "You'll get used to it, or you'll get buried." Adjusting is half the battle, they say. Endurance is the rest. Yet under every shaky plank and behind every cracked cistern, the frontier's invisible army reorganizes, plotting its next silent attack. Resilience must sprint just to stay even, for filth never tires. Tonight you lie on a straw tick, listening past the coyote yips for the cough echoing down the boardwalk, a wet rasp signaling tomorrow's fresh grave. And as eyelids sag, you realize another brutal truth sharpens beyond the lamplight, waiting its turn to strike the moment this fever loosens its grip. You peel your boots from Main Street's sucking mud and drift toward the only building still glowing after midnight, the Red Dog Saloon. Point 7 proved disease lurks in every gutter. Point 8 reveals the remedy settlers reach for raw liquor and reckless fellowship. The bat wings creak as you push inside, and stale heat smacks your face thicker than summer dust. It reeks of sweat, kerosene cheap perfume, old vomit, and horse liniment, the bouquet of frontier recreation. A battered piano gasps under fingers, too drunk to find proper keys. Cards slap felt. Coins clink. Dice rattle, laughter erupts, then collapses into coughs. Lamplight flickers through smoke so dense it turns men ghostly. Germs ride every chipped glass flies, crawl the rim before lips do. Yet patrons hail whiskey as fire strong enough to cauterize plague. You order a shot from a barkeep, who stirs each barrel with a paddle-stained brown and green. Nobody asks what floats below the surface. He cuts liquor with river water molasses and stove alcohol. Some nights, he drops a dead rattler in the keg and advertises bite with bite. The glass is cloudy and warm. Still, your belly roars louder than caution, so you swallow. It scorches tongue-throat memory. Tables sway with men who started drinking at sunrise because wives died yesterday or crops failed last week. Two drifters argue over a queen of hearts. One accuses cheating the other, brandishes a Bowie knife. Chairs scrape boots, stamp a shot cracks, Nobody flinches. Violence is as expected here as sawdust underfoot. Blood will soak in before dawn swept outside with teeth. Painted women circle like bright moths, trading smiles for coins. Perfume masks outhouse musk only if you're drunk enough. Fortunately, everyone is. They sip watered gin, poured from the same bottle all evening, collecting fevers as readily as tips. The cracked mirror reflects rouge on pallid cheeks and hunger behind practiced winks. Gambling anchors the back wall. Gold dust in poke sacks changes hands faster than cards flip. A miner flush with luck buys rounds for strangers scattering nuggets like seed. Within hours, he'll crawl outside pockets empty, retching on gravel. Tomorrow's shift in the shaft will feel darker, shorter of air, closer to collapse. Your second drink arrives free. The barkeep grins, teeth the color of river mud. He calls his Prairie lightning a cure for heartbreak snakebite. Frontier science bows to availability. You tip your head and the room tilts. Piano notes smear. The floor ripples like heat over sand. For a minute, you forget spoiled beans, swarm bites, and the taste of boiled leather stew. Bliss costs a nickel a glass and a slice of tomorrow's liver. You notice the silent drinkers' shapes hunched over glasses, swirling sediment like cheap crystal balls. They drink not for revelry, but anesthesia. One coughs crimson into a rag. Another fingers a wedding ring, now loose on famine-thinned hand. Doctors charge more than coffins, but whiskey charges less than either. Night sags toward dawn. The barkeep rings a brass bell, muttering closing, though everyone knows he'll reopen once lamps are trimmed. Outside, gray light reveals puddles of vomit and shattered bottles. A gambler lies face down in the gutter boots missing. Two lovers argue until one slaps the other, then both stagger away. You lean against a beam as the drink claws back up your throat, leaving bile hotter than coffee. Somewhere a rooster crows like mockery. The hangover preaches at sunrise. Tongue feels like tanned leather. Skull hammers in sync with distant pickaxes. Hands shake too hard to pump water, so you splash face and shirt alike, washing saloon grime downstream toward the same well that sickened yesterday's neighbor. Water tastes of iron and regret. Still, you will return. When days promise only more manure mosquitoes and mortality boards, the red dog offers 15 minutes when misery blurs. Town fathers tut about moral decay, yet many secretly own shares in the bar. The sheriff drinks free. The preacher accepts medicinal sips after funerals. Nobody shuts the doors because tax on liquor buys jail straw and school chalk. Children practice fractions by counting bullet holes in the siding. Yet the saloon is also courthouse hiring hall, dance floor, and newspaper. Here grudges settle trail crews, recruit fiddles, coax blistered feet to stomp. Community, like bacteria, multiplies where people gather, and gather they must, for loneliness kills too. You recall the street filth flies fever. The saloon answers with another fever willingly taken. One contagion flows through water, the other through glass. Both claim their tithe. 0.7's microbes soften bodies. 0.8's liquor loosens judgment, and together they thin the herd faster than wolves. Mid-morning finds you mending fence rails with a trembling hammer. The sun climbs, nails miss, splinters fly. You vow never to drink again. By dusk, dust coats lungs, coyotes howl, and piano chords drift across town, out of tune yet irresistible. Promises crumble like adobe in rain. You follow the music. Tomorrow night cards will slap. Felt coins will chime. Someone will swear the new barrel is smoother. Someone else will collapse. You may toast a stranger who dies before finishing his shot, or be the one carried feet first through the bat wings. Either fate beats facing darkness sober. So point 8 pours directly from point 7 when streets breed infection and wells brew. Poison townsfolk choose a different toxin alcohol cut with whatever burns. The Saloon is chapel, pharmacy, theater, and battlefield under one warped roof. Each glass drowns filth for a heartbeat. Each heartbeat costs another inch of health. The Prairie merely waits, adding interest to debts your liver already owes. Outside, the sky bruises purple. You wipe splinters from palms, straighten threadbare coat, and start toward that flickering doorway again, convinced salvation might rest in one more glass. Such is the 8th brutal truth. In a land rotting from the ground up, people drink to forget decay, never noticing each swallow sours the soul faster than disease ever could. Truly. Yesterday's rot gut still steams in your veins as you stagger from the Red Dog's doorway boots, skidding on manure-slick boards, one hand hugging the wall for balance, the other hovering near the revolver on your hip. Point 8 showed how liquor blurs hardship. Point 9 proves every blurred line is etched in gunmetal. Here a pistol is as common as a pocket knife, its weight both comfort and curse. Dawn paints the street pewter. Half a dozen figures shuffle toward stables, each armed a ranch hand cradling a Winchester, a freighter with a cap and ball tucked in his sash, a widowed laundress gripping a birdhead derringer. Gunsmoke from last night's quarrel still hangs between lamp posts. You recall 2 sharp cracks behind the piano. No one stayed to count bodies. Music resumed, glasses clinked, and cartridges rolled beneath the floorboards. Settlers claim firearms are tools first. You carry yours to drop a rabid coyote, scare rustlers, or bring down supper. The Prairie swallows lawmen. 5 miles past the last fence, your sheriff, jury, and executioner. Holstering iron feels like buckling courage to your belt. Yet liquor and fear mix hotter than black powder. A poker hand turns sour. Someone cries, cheat cylinders spin. The textbook duel, 2 sober men facing noon sun, rarely happens. Shootings erupt sideways. A muzzle flashes under the table. A shotgun leaps off the bar. A stray bullet ricochets into a bystander. Eastern newspapers romanticize showdowns, but locals know death here is quick, dirty, and rarely heroic. Weapons vary from relic muskets to nickel-plated Colts. Ammunition costs dear, tempting owners to reload casings until brass splits and barrels burst. More than one man loses fingers when a primer miseats. Black powder fouls cylinders, jams, triggers and sparks pocket fires if a hot coal lands on loose rounds. Children treat cartridges like marbles, pounding them with rocks until they bloom into tiny sunbursts and screams. Accidents breed grim tales. A farmer cleaning his carbine forgot the chambered round. The discharge tore through a wall and killed his only milk cow. A stage driver resting a shotgun between knees jolted over a rut. The hammer fell, blowing away half his thigh. With doctors scarce and saws dull, survivors haul stumps through the rest of their limping days. Women shoot as readily as men. A mother nursing an infant keeps a shotgun within reach. One hand rocks the cradle, the other thumbs back a hammer. Schoolchildren cast bullets during recess, turning the stove into a mint of lead equality. On the frontier, status is measured by recoil, not refinement. Native hunters ride the fringe's bows slung beside captured carbines. Mexican vaqueros holster Colts engraved with saints. Chinese railroad cooks stash pepper boxes for payday travel. Diversity finds harsh unity in cold iron. Sheriff Connolly wears a star and a peacemaker, but cannot police saloons, corrals, and tent camps at once. His office owns 3 rusty cells and a ledger of fines for discharging weapons inside town limits, debts few bother to settle. Justice often defaults to kin with Winchesters gathering at dusk outside an offender's door. Vendettas stretch generations. Bullets carved with initials pass like heirlooms. Sleep offers no sanctuary. You jolt awake to midnight gunfire, heart-hammering palms groping for steel before eyes open. Some shots warn off chicken thieves. Some mark drunken target practice at the moon. You listen, gauge distance, and decide whether to douse the lantern or brace the door. Church sermons rail against the idolatry of steel, yet even the reverend keeps a Spencer beneath the pulpit after a cougar tore the choir tent last spring. Congregations bow heads while muzzles glint between pews like silent omens. Powder settles in lungs. Black smoke coats cabin walls with soot that children later lick, thinking it candy. Residue mingles with lamp oil, turning the air itself explosive. One careless spark transforms a poker den into a roaring kiln cartridges, chaining off like firecrackers as patrons stampede. When bullets fly true, the ordeal only begins. Soft lead mushrooms inside flesh, dragging fabric threads and barnyard grit deep into tissue. Extraction by penknife leaves ragged tunnels that fester butter-colored pus. Laudanum dulls pain but invites addiction. Whiskey numbs until bleeding restarts. Many beg for a second shot, this time from a barrel, to silence infection's slow burn. Gravestones sprout faster than wheat. Families fashion markers from spare fence pickets, carving names with awls. Some read simply, "Unknown shot." Behind red dog dates, guessed by yellowed papers stuffed inside shirts. Crosses tilt in prairie wind, mute silhouettes reminding travelers that every mound hides a story, punctuated by a trigger pull. Ammo shortage sometimes grants mercy. During a cattle drive quarrel, two trail bosses leveled empty revolvers and clicked on dead chambers until laughter cooled tempers. They parted alive, but a week later one borrowed cartridges and finished the argument at dawn. Memory loads slower than revenge, yet fires just as hard. Despite constant peril, settlers cling to firearms with devotional fervor. Unarmed men feel naked. Unarmed women feel doomed. Children carve wooden pistols, rehearsing flinty stares before they grasp tragedy. Iron weaves into identity. Lay down the gun and risk erasure from frontier mythology. So you oil your revolver beside a sputtering lamp, wiping soot with a rag, stained by old blood and barley mash. The cylinder clicks smooth. The solvent's tang blends with coffee grounds drying for reuse. You promise sober restraint, but tomorrow's drought debt or deceit may shove that oath aside faster than a thumb on a hammer. Thus, point 9 rises straight from point 8's whiskey fumes. When people drink to forget misery, they arm to answer it. And the line between defense and destruction is a single trembling finger. Steel may keep wolves at bay, yet it lures human wolves nearer. Each sunrise asks whether metal will carve your epitaph. And for those who survive, the shot infection waits to teach point 10's merciless lesson. Soon, the frontier's crude doctors will attempt repairs with rusty tools, and prayers proving wounds rarely end with smoke. Blood still drips from last night's gunfight as dawn hustles you toward the only man in town who dares call himself doctor. Point 9 showed how lead finds flesh. Point 10 reveals that patching that flesh can be worse than the projectile itself. You shove through a sagging door into a room that reeks of coal smoke, spoiled whiskey, and fear. Dr. Elijah Crane wipes soot-streaked spectacles with fingers the color of ash. His diploma is a yellowed clipping pinned above a cot, an advertisement for miracle tonics clipped from a St. Louis Gazette, serving as his only credential. Crane's instruments live in an old tobacco tin. A bone saw, 2 chisels iron forceps, a bent spoon for probing, and several leeches coiled like black punctuation in murky brine. He sterilizes none of them, though he sometimes drags a blade across his trouser leg. Pine floorboards are stained the shade of rusty roofing nails. Every blot records somebody's unlucky hour. Afternoon light seeps through warped shutters and falls on jars labeled Laudanum Calomel and God's Mercy. A patient groans on the cot fingers, knotting horsehair stuffing. A 44 slug rests near his shoulder blade. Dragging him here carved a wet scar down Main Street. Crane splashes raw bourbon over the wound snaps at 2 cowhands to pin the man's arms and lowers the spoon. Anesthetics are scarce, so pain must be wrestled. The victim bites a strip of harness leather. His scream rattles panes filmed with coal dust. Outside, horses shy and pedestrians quicken their pace, eager to forget that agony can sound like a prophecy for their own bones. Blood spatters Crane's vest as he digs. He fishes for the slug like a miner, panning grit for gold, finally dropping misshapen lead into a chipped saucer. He packs the hole with lint ripped from an old sheet, sprinkles carbolic powder that expired before the war, and wraps everything in gauze cut from a flour sack. Then he tilts bourbon into the patient's mouth until the eyes glaze and flutter like candle flames. If fever does not claim him, infection might. Crane's day never pauses. A ranch girl limps in with a compound fracture. Bone splinters poke through calico like white thorns. He resets the limb against a doorframe, binds it with willow splints, and tells her mother to brew strong comfrey tea. Antibiotics exist only as rumors. Should red streaks climb toward her heart amputation, will be Saturday's chore performed with the same saw, now soaking in lukewarm lye. Childbirth claims nearly as many lives as bullets. When labor stalls, Crane reaches for crochet hooks to reposition breech feet, working under a lamp that flutters with every draft. He forces opium between a mother's clenched teeth, listens to hymns mingle with agony, and hopes neither woman nor infant bleeds beyond rescue. Survival is tallied at sunrise. Real celebration waits weeks until postpartum fevers reveal their verdict. Disease floats like prairie dust. Diphtheria clamps throats shut. Smallpox seeds skin with hellish pearls. Cholera drains bodies until they fold like empty grain sacks. Crane counters with purgatives, mustard plasters, and isolation. Families tie yellow rags to doorposts, but wind ignores warnings. Coffins stack in freight wagons bound for boot-top cemeteries, where shallow graves flood each springs, exposing memories nobody wishes to revisit. Even minor wounds can maim. A corral splinter swells into an abscess the size of a peach. Crane lances it with the same knife that sliced bacon at dawn. Tetanus lurks in every rusty nail. Once jaws lock, he can only mop foam while counting spasms between scriptures. He has delivered more eulogies than cures, yet townsfolk still knock because hope dies slower than flesh. Home remedies sprout from desperation. Settlers chew willow bark for fever, pack spiderwebs into cuts, smoke Jimson weed to still a cough, and steep bearberry leaves for failing kidneys. Some cures help others kill. A traveling patent medicine wagon trumpets wonders. Bile beans, feverine, Dr. Greeley's electric pills, each bottle brighter than stained glass, each promise thinner than calico. Crane despises the peddlers, yet secretly buys their tonics, admitting that snake oil hope sometimes keeps a pulse beating long enough for faith or fortune to catch up. Sanitation refuses to cooperate. The stench rising from his guttered alley mingles with distant saloon smoke, mixing sickness and vice into a single sour perfume that hangs over town like a grim reminder of how cheaply life is traded here. Rain gutters channel sewage past Crane's porch. Flies convene on bandages drying from the rafters. His bucket draws from the same town well that toppled privies last month. He boils what he can, but coal costs more every week, and patients outnumber boiling pots. He rinses blades with liquor and cools them by waving sterility by breeze on this desolate medical frontier where mercy travels very slowly. After dusk, Crane smokes on the porch, watching kerosene lanterns wink along Main Street. He rolls the retrieved slug between thumb and forefinger, knowing it will outlast its former owner. He drafts letters begging for proper instruments, yet freight charges equal half a year's fees. Instead, he lists debts: $60 in chickens, 2 moth-eaten rugs, and a broken pocket watch that no longer ticks. He will likely never collect. You leave with skin intact, but spirit wounded. The revolver on your belt feels heavier. Every cartridge now whispers of pus and bone saws. Point 9's firefights promised quick endings. Point 10 proves the aftermath smolders like a slow-burning fuse. Out here, success is measured not by avoiding injury, but by enduring the cure. And tomorrow, if fever loosens its grip, the Prairie's next trial will arrive indifferent to gauze prayers or the trembling optimism that keeps you upright. For the West Awards, no rest wagons must still ford. Swollen rivers, pickaxes must still chase. Phantom veins, fences must still rise against stampeding herds. In this land, even recovery is only intermission before the relentless landscape unveils another harsh way to test your fragile humanity again. Last night, the doctor's saw was still singing when you limped from his doorway, stitches prickling like live wires beneath a crust of dried bourbon. Point 10 proved that survival on the frontier rarely ends with the bandage. Point 11 shows how any journey threatens to tear the gauze away and start the bleeding anew. You travel because standing still means starvation, yet every mile westwards is mined with hazards. The mare beneath you jostles unkindly, each hoofbeat punches pain through your half-healed shoulder until you imagine the bullet still lodged there. Trails are vague scars across the prairie, sometimes twin ruts, sometimes nothing but rumor. In dry months, dust boils behind wagons, searing lungs and blinding eyes. In wet months, those ruts become trenches of axle-deep muck that swallow livestock whole. When freight family or hope demands more space, you crawl onto a Conestoga drawn by oxen as patient as stones. No springs cushion the plank seat. Rocks launch your teeth together. Potholes clap spine against oak until vertebrae sing. Bacon grease on the hubs quiets one squeak only for another to start. A cracked wheel spells abandonment. Iron tools, way too much to haul replacement spokes, require trees that do not grow on sunburned flats, and coyotes crave stranded calves and people equally. Rivers ignore your timetable. The shallowest ford can drown a seasoned drover once snowmelt fattens the current. Before entering, you wade chest-deep sounding with a pole. Then you coerce the team forward. Brown water climbs, spoke seeps through floorboards, and soaks flour you counted on for bread 6 weeks hence. A hidden hole tips everything sideways. Trunks, rifles, and a squalling pig vanish downstream. If a child tumbles, someone dives. Many never surface. Dry ground is ambush too. Prairie dog holes lurk beneath swaying grass. One misstep shatters a horse's leg. Mercy is swift and brutal. A pistol shot between familiar eyes, a saddle now slung across aching shoulders. From that moment you walk, counting each footfall against dwindling biscuits and blistered heels. Weather gilds calamity. Dust devils whip grit into nostrils and open wounds. Lightning splinters cottonwoods without warning, igniting grass that outruns galloping horses. Winter seals mountain passes in hours. A blizzard buries wagons to the canvases, then hollows the snow, leaving fabric sagging over white caverns of death. You burn fence rails for warmth, while oxen freeze upright beside them, eyes filmed with ice. Disease rides in every canteen. Cholera lurks in water scooped from a creek where a wagon upstream dumped chamber pots. Measles leaps canvas wall to canvas wall until an entire column coughs red-rimmed breath. On the Oregon Trail, graves appear every 100 yards. Many bear no names, only shards of china or a child's wooden doll to mark the emptiness left behind. Bandits respect neither illness nor grief. Dust plumes announce vulnerable caravans hours before arrival. At dusk, rifles rise from sage shadows, demanding coin ammunition, perhaps a daughter. Draw, and you risk .10's bone saw again. Comply, and you travel lighter, counting the loss with every squeak of a now bare axle. Even supposed progress conspires. Steam trains promise speed, yet boilers burst like artillery scalding passengers in iron coffins. Sparks from chimneys ignite prairie tinder. Flames outrun locomotives, warping rails so that wheels leap tracks and plunge cars into gullies. Survivors limp along ties toward the faint gleam of another lantern, praying the doctor at journey's end owns cleaner forceps than the last. Navigation mocks determination. Maps fade. Compasses stutter near iron deposits. Cloud mirages erase distant bluffs that should guide you. A wrong canyon choice can pen you between sheer walls with no water until mules collapse. Turning back spends food you no longer carry. Pressing forward gambles on a spring you have only heard about in campfire legend. Night encampments offer rest laced with vigilance. Wagons circle wheels, chalked. Someone ties a bell to the picket line. Coyotes prowl just beyond lantern glow. Exhausted sentries drift asleep, and mules jerk awake at phantom rustles. Dawn reveals hoofprints from horses stolen without a shout, plus arrow-shaped prints that fade into nothing. Whether human or myth, the loss is real. Loneliness is another predator. Miles stretch silent, but for creaking leather and the mutter of wheels. Minds fray. Travelers mutter to mirage companions or wander into tall grass, chasing lullabies on the wind. Trail guides call the sickness blue ruin. The cure is either conversation or whiskey. Both run out quicker than distance. Repairs consume daylight. Iron rims loosen overnight as wood shrinks. You heat them and coals hammer glowing hoops back onto hubs while coffee boils beside ember sparks. Each repair burns time the sky will not refund. Lose too many hours and storms overtake you. Race too fast and livestock collapse. Pace becomes prayer. Despite every threat, motion continues. Settlements glimmer ahead like salvation. Another doctor, another saloon, perhaps a letter from home. You imagine unspoiled bread, a straw, tick-free of lice, a church bell that does not double as alarm. These dreams spin the wheels when muscles plead surrender. Every wheel turn is a wager that courage can outpace catastrophe for just one precious sunrise more. At last, rooftops appear wavering in heat waves. Your bandage leaks pus. Fever pulses behind your eyes. You hitch the team outside a clapboard clinic where sawdust still stains the stoop. A new surgeon lifts the linen nods at the corruption and reaches for a saw sharper than imagination. The cycle restarts, endure the blade so you may travel. Travel so you may endure the blade. Point 11 thus loops seamlessly back to Point 10 roads. Flay what medicine stitches, and medicine prepares bodies only to be punished by the next mile. On the frontier, danger is never isolated. It marches in grim procession, each hardship escorting the next across a continent determined to test breath itself. Yet forward, you drag hope, because somewhere beyond the horizon, the trail might finally end. Or you will, and at least the journey will cease. After the wagon finally creaks to a halt outside the new camp, you step down bones jangling from 100 miles of ruts. Point 11 proved travel itself can kill. Point 12 shows the work. Waiting at journey's end may finish what the road began. A frontier wage is never just ink on paper. It is ore dust in your lungs, a horn in your thigh, a gear's teeth around your sleeve. You came for silver. The shaft mouth gapes like a cannon, damp breath curling out. Lanterns bob along rails that vanish into blackness. The foreman shoves a pick into your hands and spits gray phlegm. The hoist drops faster than prayer timbers groaning. You swing, all morning sparks flying as steel kisses quartz. By noon, your wrists throb, and the tunnel fills with choking haze. Candles quiver. Warning air is thinning. You keep striking because the day's pay ends only when your candle does. Dust coats lungs like wet plaster. Each cough leaves gray flecks on your palm. Old hands call it miner's consumption and laugh until they wheeze blood. If rock and dust don't claim you, timber might props dry crack, then explode under the mountain's slow shrug. Rescuers sometimes dig for days, finding only boots' leather sucked off when earth swallowed the rest. Not all death is underground. Cowhands roll from bedrolls before sunrise, frost-stiffening blankets in May, heat-melting saddle leather in August. You mount a half-broke Mustang and trail a living river of beef toward the railhead. Lightning turns that river into a stampede. 3,000 steers pound the prairie hooves, shattering night. You chase yelling until your throat bleeds, trying to swirl the front ranks. One stumble, and you vanish beneath a rolling sea of horns. Between stampedes lie rivers. Cattle balk riders prod. Current lifts hooves, drifts bodies sideways. A loose cow slams your shin. Flesh splits to bone. Whiskey cleans the gash. Prayer fights infection. If you limp ashore tomorrow, you still ride. Homesteaders find quieter traps. Grain bins tempt children. One slip and kernels swallow them like quicksand. Windmills snap in sudden gusts. Falling spars scythe whoever fixed the pump. A belt slips on the new threshing machine, catches a sleeve, and suddenly an arm hangs by threads. The nearest doctor may be sawing another miner's leg, so the blacksmith heats a knife and ends the hanging. Industry promising ease bites harder. Sawmill blades sing spraying cedar scent and microscopic razors. A knot kicks. Teeth bite flesh. You tie a tourniquet with dusty rope and hope the company store still honors your scrip after you lose a hand. Railroad gangs slam sledges dawn to dusk. One lapse and a partner's swing splits your scalp. Dynamite clears cuts through granite. Sometimes the fuse outruns feet, hurling shards that punch through tent canvas days later when wind jostles loose talus. Women's work offers no mercy. Laundry boilers erupt scalding steam. Treadle machines chew fingertips. Kitchen stoves explode when damp wood spits embers into kerosene stored too close. A midwife rides through sleet to a ranch 10 miles out. Her cutter skids on hidden ice and pins her until dawn. Frost quiets her pulse. Every craft seeds its own disease. Mule skinners hip from endless jolting wagons. Barkeep's palsy from tapping kegs. Telegrapher's cramp that freezes fingers. Printers lead colic, gnawing guts. Some afflictions earn names. Others just drain strength until a man topples beside his tools. Tools fight back. Grease cups run dry. Gears seize. An iron rod snaps and ricochets off bolts like a hornet burying itself in a chest. The coroner lists mechanical misadventure, and the widow prays the clerk counts hours worked honestly. Hazard pay lures the desperate $2 a day for blasting rock 40 for trailing cattle if you survive. Company scrip buys inflated flower binding workers to debt they dig deeper with each shift. Quit, and hunger follows. Stay, and rock may fall. Camaraderie tries to dull peril. Miners share canteens, carve flutes from ore whistle hymns that echo like canaries. Cowhands swap tails under stars. Mill hands dance Saturdays. Beneath lanterns, a one-armed fiddler sawing reels that make amputees spin like whole men. Humor becomes armor jokes about missing fingers to lighten the load, or counting ribs after a bronc toss because more room for lungs. Laughter tastes of sawdust and iron, but buys breath against dread. Even the act of resting can betray you. In bunkhouses above the timberline, men crowd triple bunks. A lantern tips, straw ticks ignite, and a night meant for sleep becomes a sprint through smoke, in Long John's feet, crunching on frozen snow, while the roof roars sparks at the stars. By dawn, only a stone chimney stands ringed by scorched boots that couldn't be reclaimed before flame. Those who escaped face frostbite. Those who didn't leave nothing but twisted springs and the smell of ash. The ledger never lies. Pay envelopes hold coins warmed by palms that stiffen soon after. Coffins ride the same rail cars as ore and lumber pine boxes wedged between freight like grim punctuation. Some families plant crosses. Others can't afford nails. Death claims the anxious and the arrogant, the careful and the careless alike. Yet people keep working. Hope whispers of a strike rich enough to buy a dry farm, a safe stove, maybe a doctor with clean forceps. Each dawn, you double knot boots, though laces are stained by yesterday's blood. You spit dust saddle up, or shoulder a pick, wagering flesh against fortune one more time. So, Point 12 clamps the vice begun in Point 11. The road flays the traveler, the job finishes the task. Movement is peril, station is peril. On this frontier, earning bread means courting the very catastrophe you just outran. And if fortune smiles long enough for payday, another brutal truth waits at home loneliness that slips through clapboard walls, whispering that no wage buys peace when friends lie beneath fresh sod and the wind keeps moaning through broken mine timbers. After yesterday's shift ended with a crushed thumb and another name chalked on the mine's casualty slate, you limp back to your shack and learn how danger lingers once the tools are hung. Point 12 proved the job can wreck flesh. Point 13 shows the silence that follows can wreck the mind faster. The cabin sits a mile from the nearest lantern 50 from a telegraph pole. Night is enormous. Wind sighs. Coyotes yip. The stove ticks ordinary noises that drop like pebbles into a well of hush, so deep you swear you hear them echo inside your skull. Candles light nothing but 4 log walls and your own shadow. After weeks of 14-hour shifts, that shadow starts to look like another person, and sometimes you answer it. Loneliness grows by inches. It starts when the tin plate clinks alone at supper advances, when you speak to the coffee pot for company, and blooms the first time you whirl with pistol raised because floorboards creaked. Ashamed you sit, but the silence stays. Weather weaponizes isolation. Blizzard drifts pack to the eaves, burying the door. You tunnel for wood, lose the rope in white swirl, and circle blindly until frozen lashes crack. Inside, frost rims the bucket. Ink stiffens in its bottle. Some settlers carve notches for every day the mail fails. Gashes climb doorframes like ivy testimony to time sealed off from the world. Distance distorts calendars. A letter sent in spring may arrive under autumn leaves, its news already tombstones. You write anyway, rereading the replies until creases split and ink smears into ghosts. Words are thread. Without them, thought begins to unravel. Families bruise too. Couples ration sentences as if they cost daylight. Children invent invisible friends, naming them after distant towns. Some nights, a father bolts outside, chasing phantom music and freezes within yards. Prairie madness doctors call it, though most doctors are weeks away. Symptoms staring at the horizon, plucking splinters from calloused hands, sobbing without sound. Remedies. Company song any proof of another heartbeat. Yet chores hoard daylight. Gatherings are scarce. women suffer doubly. A wife may pass seasons with only toddlers to answer. Fever steals infants. Grief festers in an empty cradle. Diaries whisper fears. The wind talks louder. I dread my own thoughts. Some entries simply stop. Men fracture differently. A cowboy rides fence for weeks, speaking only to a horse. Back at camp, the jokes feel too loud, so he drifts into the dark, where no one demands words his mouth has forgotten. Revolvers end some rides. Others return hollow-eyed half-ghosts on half-rations. Settlers improvise defenses. Two families nail a tin can to a fence post halfway between homesteads, swapping notes in oilcloth. Others string telegraph wire across 3 miles and tap hymns each night. On still evenings, women place lamps in windows. Pinpoints blink across prairie black, fragile proof. Neither house has fallen silent. When roads thaw, the cure arrives in bursts. Barn raisings, quilting bees, country dances, emergency medicine for the psyche. Fiddles shriek boots. Stomp widowers, spin orphans, laughter ricochets off rafters. Morning aches, but spirits ride higher for weeks, as if melody still hums in the beams they lifted together. Yet overdose is real. A miner starved of voices gulps whiskey words light and staggers out muttering. Overstimulated nerves shake until the six-shooter supplies punctuation. Another tarp, another pine lid. Another name for the wind to learn. Commerce is lonely too. Peddlers haul wagons of notions, yet crave someone remembering their face at the next stop. They trade stories like coin, but by the third retelling, each joke tastes of tin. On open trails, they lie awake, coyotes harmonizing with their heart's hollow echo. Technology dangles bait. The telegraph clicks at the railhead, but fees gulp wages. A single phonograph warbles in a saloon song, wobbling through cracked petals, reminding patrons of crowds they may never join. Talk drifts of a telephone line. Blizzards bury the idea beside other bones of progress. Even success isolates. Strike a rich vein, and you dine with armed guards. Build a big ranch, and every neighbor's handshake measures envy. Prosperity walls a man off until he cannot recall the last hand he shook without suspicion. Still resilience sprouts. Some plant lilacs hauled in flower tins betting fragrance can anchor the soul. Others memorize poetry and declaim to stars. Children train magpies to mimic laughter. The bird's rasp echoes at dawn, mocking despair. Diaries that once tallied grief begin noting small mercies. First bloom. Neighbor rode by, felt less alone. Mail day is both festival and gamble. Long before the stage appears, someone shouts "pony coming" and the street tilts forward. Hearts sprint while hands tremble, fearing disappointment. The driver halts, drops crates of nails, a sack of onions, and perhaps a pouch of letters softened by miles. One ribbon of handwriting can lift an entire blockman shave. Women hum. Children chase the wagon like thirsty colts chasing rain. That night, lamps burn late, reading each sentence twice, tasting words like honey after months of dust. Isolation has texture sand, hissing through cracks. Frost snapping under boots, a violin string tuned too tight. It trains senses to savor any contrast, the thin page of a catalog, the oily glide of harness leather, the brief warmth of a passing handshake. These scraps sketch an inner map of comfort landmarks as essential as rivers on any surveyor's chart. With each new mark, the prairie's void shrinks by a measurable breath. Small mercies keep battered spirits from blowing away. As the prairie's hush bruises, the mind people start searching for reasons beyond empty horizons. Point 13 showed how isolation eats the soul. Point 14 reveals how that same emptiness breeds division. When company finally arrives, new faces, new tongues, new clothes. The relief of human contact curdles into suspicion and loneliness, morphs into prejudice, sharper than any Bowie knife. Chinese track layers, Mexican vaqueros, black cavalrymen, Norwegian homesteaders, Lakota hunters, all converge on the same sun-bleached acres, chasing room to breathe. Yet the welcome mat is nailed to a trapdoor. Newspapers label the newcomers coolies, greasers, sodbusters, or savages shorthand that collapses entire histories into slurs. Signs outside saloons spell rules in crooked paint: no Indians served. Dogs, maybe. Indians, never. The language of exclusion becomes a border. No map records, but every heartbeat feels. Tension first shows in wages. Irish ballast crews remember hunger back in Dublin, yet bristle when the railroad announces that Chinese crews will grade hills for half pay. Out on the range, Mexican vaqueros teach rope tricks the Texas boys copy, then refuse to credit. When the herd reaches Dodge, the gringos claim the big tips, while the men who invented the flourish sleep in the hayloft. One night, a vaquero is found beaten behind the livery. Black soldiers of the 9th Cavalry patrol wagon roads fending off bandit raids that threaten every freighter's life. Yet merchants refuse them a shave in the only barber shop. The troopers scrape cheeks with cold pocket knives beside the water trough steel mirrors reflecting a republic that took them to war but will not let them sit for a haircut. Native nations suffer worst. A Cheyenne hunting party rides east following bison promised by treaties already broken. They find fences, locomotives, telegraph poles, strange wooden soldiers marching forever. Cattle graze where buffalo once thundered. When a steer staggers with an arrow in its flank, headlines scream red depredation. Soldiers gallop, rifles glint, homesteads cheer. The herd that destroyed prairie grass becomes holy property, while the people it replaced become trespassers on ancestral dust. Violence is not always loud. In mining towns, the Chinese quarter crowds beneath cliffs, no white miner will work. Their laundries steam all night, scrubbing grime from shirts worn by men who spit insults on the way out. One spark causes a fire rumored set by a drunken prospector. Flames leap building to building. Bucket brigades stop at the property line, watching roofs collapse like folding fans. In the morning, ash still smolders and new signs appear. Chinatown relocate or face the torch. They relocate. Prejudice enlists law. California levies a foreign miners tax. Montana bans marriage between races. Kansas depots enforce colored waiting rooms. The rules travel faster than stagecoaches tucked in sheriff's pockets for easy fines. When statutes lag, mobs improvise rope law from cottonwood limbs, verdicts swinging above dusty crossroads while children point. Even churches fracture. One Methodist circuit rider shares scripture with Swedes and Crows in the same tent, only to be reprimanded by elders 3 states away. Congregations split along accent lines. Hymns rising skyward carry harmony inside each group, discord between them. Heaven, it seems, is big enough for everyone only once bodies shed color and custom. Yet the frontier is a practical tutor. Snow does not respect race. Coyotes sniff any door with equal hunger. During the blizzard of '78, a German widow collapses while chopping wood. 2 Omaha men pigback her children through drifts to the stockade. For a heartbeat, divisions thaw gratitude, softens hearts until paydays resume. Preachers scold, and memory rewrites acts of grace into anecdotes stripped of their Savior's name. Resistance gathers quietly. Chinese workers sue exclusion ordinances. Black farmers form cooperatives pooling seed and knowledge. Lakota elders meet in secret valleys, teaching children forbidden songs. Their courage rarely makes headlines, but it writes itself into whispered lullabies that carry farther than rifle shots. the land listens, remembering. Children walk between worlds. They trade marbles beside schoolhouses where lessons arrive in England's tongue, but recess belongs to everyone. A girl named Rosalia drapes her new friend Millie in a serape to block the wind. Millie returns the favor with a knitted scarf. On graduation day, they hug promising letters, little pledges stronger than statutes because they bind hearts, not wrists. Still, the machinery of expansion grinds on. Surveyors divide valleys into rectangles selling tomorrow for $2 an acre today. Any title predating the latest deed becomes suspect. Courts side with whoever waves the freshest paper, and sheriffs back the paper with lead. Some nights cabins burn. Boundaries redraw themselves in ash, and sunrise finds possession 9/10 of both law and morality. Loneliness, once merely silent, now echoes with the crack of splitting communities. The man who sang duets with the darkness in Point 13 hears new voices, but learns they arrive wearing chain scars or wanted posters. He must decide whether to widen his hearth or sharpen his pick handle. Many choose the latter, believing scarcity ends when competition kneels, not when empathy rises. Yet the Prairie occasionally surprises. After a tornado rips the roof from the Red Dog Saloon, the entire town, white, black, Chinese, Mexican, Lakota, forms a ragged chain, passing lumber hand to hand. Hammers ring like applause for unity. For a day, they build more than walls. They build memory of what cooperation feels like. By dusk, the roof stands patched quilt-wise from every scrap. Rain begins drumming a hymn that belongs to nobody, and therefore to all. People share stew stories, silent apologies. Small hopes burn steady despite each gale. Point 14. Therefore steps from the quiet agony of Point 13 to expose division's louder torment. Isolation may starve the mind, but prejudice devours the entire body satyam, turning neighbors into prey and opportunity into ashes. And somewhere beyond the uproar, the final brutal truth waits, measuring how much of the wilderness will remain once people finish carving lines into one another's hearts. Yesterday's quarrel over landlines still echoes, but the hammering of a new barn rises louder. Point 14 showed prejudice splintering neighbors. Point 15 reveals how even amid suspicion, people merge muscles to wrest bounty from the land, only to leave the earth itself bruised beyond recognition. The day begins with the crack of a mallet. Rough beams slide off wagons and slap into muddy footings, guided by calloused palms of every hue. Irish carpenters notch joints, Lakota horsemen drag timbers with ponies, Mexican vaqueros loop rawhide lashings, and German matrons pass tin cups of sorghum coffee. Yesterday, these same hands argued over wages and worship, but a rising storm demands a roof before nightfall. Cooperation is less virtue than necessity. If one claim falls, the wind will find the next. Barn raisings are only the first verse. Come planting neighbors' hitch teams nose to tail, carving furrows in record time. At harvest, they move like migrating birds. Scythes shimmer through wheat on one farm, then flap to the next until every granary bulges. When fire threatens a sawmill, men who curse each other's accents still form a bucket-line boots, sliding on wet cedar chips, while flames roar enough to drown insult. The church social stitches spirits, too. Quilts raffle beside pies, fiddlers saw. Reel's children chase fireflies that pulse like runaway embers. Laughter lifts for a moment above freight debt and bullet scars, persuading the lonely their stories might still weave into larger cloth. The Prairie offers no insurance except what neighbors provide, yet every nail driven for community shakes loose another board from creation's own architecture. The same axes that square posts for barns topple cottonwoods, shading creek banks, exposing soil to flash floods that gouge 10-foot trenches overnight. Sawdust silts the water until trout gasp belly up among curls of wet bark. Farther west, hunters ride with Springfield rifles shooting bison simply to prove the new breechloader's true. Carcasses bleach by the thousands, tongues cut for trophies, hides stacked like cordwood. Smokehouses fill with jerky, yet the market swells faster than bellies, so bones are ground into fertilizer and shipped back east. The great shaggy herds that once sounded like thunder die in near silence, and with them vanish the migrations indigenous nations timed their seasons around. Timber crews follow the rails. Crosscut saws bite white pine-dropping giants that have never known steel. Logs clog rivers in spring drives, scratching stone beds bare of moss. Sawmills belch sparks that torch piles. Wind carries cinders onto new-growth seedlings before their first cones set. Hills once shagged with green turn to bald slopes that shiver under snowmelt, releasing avalanches that wipe out line shacks and flood homesteads miles below. Ore camps add another wound. Cyanide leaches gold from crumbled quartz, then slips through tailings dams into meadow streams. Cattle drink metallic water, and stagger tongues blackened. Housewives boil kettles and watch rainbow sheens dance across the soup. The company doctor blames mountain stomach scribbles chalky powders and boards the next train. To make room for fields, settlers burn prairie grass in rings that glow like sunset on the ground. Flames ride wind over miles, scorching badger holes and lizard burrows. The blackened aftermath sprouts wheat, but the soil never designed for roots that shallow lifts in droughty summers and travels east as a sepia ghost. Coating train cars, city windows, even Atlantic sails with dust from land nobody remembers owning. Government agents arrive with printed maps and blue uniforms, instructing tribal elders that their people must relocate again to allow orderly development. When protests rise, the agents point to massacred bison and say the herds are gone, so the people must go too. Wagons rumble south, carrying songs muted to murmurs. Somewhere beyond the horizon, plows already gleam. The paradox hardens the very gatherings that keep settlers sane. Barn bees, husking parties, logging gangs accelerate the environmental unraveling that will one day starve their descendants. Community milestone follows ecological tombstone. Each victory, ringed by citizens cheering a new bridge or pasture, is matched by another scar where cottonwood roots clutch only air. Still hope refuses to surrender. A schoolteacher saves acorns in a tobacco pouch and plants them along the creek her students use for washing slates. A blacksmith refuses to shoe horses for buffalo hunters, turning down coin to honor a vanished rumble he misses at dusk. A Lakota grandmother trades beadwork for apple saplings, staking them beside a spring so her grandchildren will know sweet fruit untouched by war or rail. Such gestures seem paltry against the saw's growl and rifle's crack, yet they whisper that stewardship can sprout where greed once trampled. When the new barn rises, its ridgepole crowned with a cedar bough, a superstitious nod to the forest sacrificed, the crowd pauses. Silence spreads like sunrise. For one breath, hammer-scarred hands and bullet-burned hearts remember the ground beneath the flooring stones, the sky that will weep through any unfinished seam, the wind that carries both seeds and cinders. Night falls. Lanterns wink on casting halos over fresh shingle rows. Workers drift home through starlit fields, boots brushing tender wheat tips. In the dark, crickets resume where hammers left off. The prairie sounds smaller. No bison, fewer owls, but it endures waiting to judge whether tomorrow's labor will heal or harm. Point 15. Therefore completes the cycle begun. In point 1, humans wrest control from nature to survive, then stretch that control until the very foundation of survival cracks. Community proves both salvation and saboteur, binding neighbors together while prying loose the web that once bound land, beast, and sky. And yet, beneath every charred stump, seeds wait ready to make verdicts of their own once axes quiet, reminding future settlers that mercy toward the earth is mercy toward themselves. If they heed that lesson, the next barn they raise may stand beside living cottonwoods above clear water, beneath skies still trembling with migrating wings. If they ignore it, the silence that follows will be of their own deliberate making and bitter beyond recall.